Hello children, welcome back to history class. In our previous video, we discussed regarding the major inventions and also the impact of the industrial revolution. Okay, so in today's class, we'll be discussing regarding the imperialism. Okay, so what is mean by imperialism and what are the effects of the imperialism? The word imperialism has originated from the Latin word imperium, okay? So, which means the supreme power, okay? What is imperialism means? Imperialism means supreme power. It refers to the system by which a powerful nation established its control over another country. So question can be asked, what is imperialism? So answer is, it's a system by which a powerful nation establish its control over another country, either by political pressure, infiltration, and annexation, or by outright wars. Okay. These colonies were governed and administered by the imperial nation through its representatives or a puppet government. So, the imperial nations exploited the resources of these colonies for their own economic interest. So, colonies provided raw materials, cheap labor, agricultural land, and trading ports to the imperial nations. Okay, so you can see that once they gain the control of a particular country under their control, okay, so they make that country as their colonies. Okay, so from those colonies, what they do, they take all the raw materials, okay, and the cheap labor, agricultural land for their own economic interest. Okay, you can take the example of India. So India was a colony of Britain. What they did, they have taken all the raw materials whichever they needed, like we exported the raw materials like cotton, jute. We exported the species like pepper, cardamom, cinnamon, and so on. Whatever the raw materials that they were in need of, they have gained it from their colonies. By the end of the 15th century, the territorial ambitions of the European nations were mostly confined. Okay, so their ambition was to acquire one another's territories in Europe, okay, within the European continent. But however, when these geographical discoveries and the establishment of new trading routes and the consequent trade relations stimulated, okay, encouraged their rivalry in a new direction. So the European countries started now fighting for the colonies and for the trade in Asia and African continent. Okay, by the end of the 19th century, England and France had built up a huge colonial empire in Asia and African continent. British imperialism was focused on maintaining and expanding their trade by exploiting the resources of its colonies. Okay, so the colonies like India, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Egypt, South Africa, the Serbian islands, and many ports of Africa. Okay, these were the colonies of the Britain. Some other countries of the world like Germany, Italy, Russia, and Japan also wanted to increase their influence and create their own colonies in Asia and Africa. So, these colonies were essential for their progress as they could provide raw materials for their industries and markets for their finished products. Okay, so why they were concentrating on the colonies? Why they need to have the colonies? Because they wanted a sufficient raw materials for their industries. Okay, that is the one reason. And the next one is they need the markets for their finished products. Okay, so whatever the products are made in the industries, that has to be sold, isn't it? So to sell it, they need a market. Okay, so they utilized these colonies for that purpose. Next, we'll discuss regarding the causes for the imperialism. With the progress of the Industrial Revolution, Europe was producing much more than she needed, and consequently, she had to find markets to sell of her surplus goods. Okay, so we have discussed the industrial revolution in our previous video. Okay, so due to this industrial revolution, what had happened in Britain, they could produce more than what they need. Okay, so they had a surplus products in their hand, so now all these products has to be sold. So the capitalists now began to penetrate into new areas, looking for new investments, raw materials and new markets. So their efforts were supported by the big armies and navies of powerful national governments. So the government of such countries supported these capitalists. Okay, so colonies were needed to accommodate surplus population. So there were a number of industries which were requiring a number of people who has to work in the industry. Okay, as such there were many people who came from the village to the towns. So when they come for the towns, they need the place to accommodate, isn't it? So for that they need a number of colonies where they can just accommodate the population. The next reason is European governments regarded that the power and prestige of a nation depended on the area of its overseas positions. Okay, so what did the European countries or the government think? How many colonies they had? Okay, so the number of colonies which were under the control of a particular nation is considered as their power and prestige. Okay, so they just started acquiring a number of colonies under their control. They started fighting for the colonies because it was their power and prestige. The Europeans considered themselves superior to the Asian and Africans. Okay, so the next reason is the Europeans, they themselves consider as they are superior than the Asians and the Africans. So now it is their duty, it was their burden to bring civilization in many countries of Asia and Africa. So there were many nations which were not civilized, so it is their responsibility to civilize these countries. Okay, so that was the superior thought that the European countries had. Okay, so consequently, a large number of people and a major portion of the earth came under their control. Okay, so there were six great powers of the world at that time, namely Great Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Russia, and Japan, which were concentrated on acquiring the colonies under their control. Next we'll see the impact of imperialism. Okay, so when a European power came into a foreign country of Asia, Africa, or Serbian and conquered it for its own imperialistic motives, it completely dominated that country. Okay, so when a European power came into a foreign country like in Asia, Africa, okay, so it dominated that particular country. So Europeans dominated the Asians. Okay, it changed its administrative, social and economic policies of its own benefits. So the Europeans started changing the policies in the field of administration, in the field of economic, okay, for their own benefits. So the imperialist nations made huge profits using the resources of their colonies, so they became richer and richer. So in the course of these developments, the imperialistic nations also brought many new inventions and discoveries to these colonies, which transformed them for the better. However, imperialism had far-reaching negative effect which outweighed their positive effects. So let's see what are those positive effects and what are the negative effects. The first one is the imperialistic nations built roads, canals and railways in the colonies of Asia and Africa, so which was one of the positive effects. Okay, so there were proper roads, canals and also the railways, which was introduced in most of the Asian and African countries for the first time. Okay, the next one is they established many new industries in these colonies for their own benefit. Okay, so however, they established the new industries, but in the course of their development, they also benefited the people of these colonies. So many number of people got employment opportunities due to these new industries. They introduced improved medical care and better method of sanitation in the colonies that were not there before. They introduced new technology and paved the way for modernization. Okay, so these colonies, due to the introduction of new technologies by the European countries, moved towards the modernization. Okay, so these are some of the positive effects of the imperialism. Next, we'll see the negative effects of the imperialism. The first point, the breaking of an age-old patterns of agrarian economy. What is agrarian economy? Agricultural economy. In the colonies, what did the European nations do? They forced the agriculturers, they forced the farmers to grow commercial crops. Okay, so they forced the agriculturers, the farmers to grow the commercial crops, and thus they destroyed the self-sufficiency of their rural society. Okay, so they couldn't able to grow the crops which they are interested to grow. Okay, so naturally the colonies were growing the food crops, okay, for their self-sufficiency, but where the European countries forced the Indian farmers or the Asian farmers to grow the commercial crops. Okay, the second point is they made land revenue policies according to their own benefits and charged exorbitant land revenue and evicted the farmers from their land in case of non-payment. Okay, so they used to introduce or they introduced the land revenue policy, and based on which they collected the land revenue from the farmers. If the farmers are unable to pay the revenue, what they did, they chased them away from the agricultural land. Okay, so this ruined the very base of economic development of the countries of Asia and Africa. The next point is they ruined the traditional handicrafts and the cottage industries of the colonies, rendered many people jobless. Okay, one of the most important negative impact of the imperialism is it ruined, it destroyed the traditional handicrafts and the cottage industries. Okay, so due to the industries which are introduced by the European nations, okay, the traditional handicrafts and the cottage industries didn't find its market. Okay, and the people those who are working in those traditional handicrafts and the cottage industries lost their jobs. Okay, the next point, they considered themselves socially superior. Okay, so they consider as a superior caste and culturally advanced, okay, than the people of the colonies. So they introduced many changes in the system of education and the customs and the culture of these colonized countries. Okay, so they thought that they are civilizing the colonies. In many parts of the colonies in the world, the traditional cultures were destroyed or replaced by the Western culture. So this is how the traditional cultures were destroyed and adopted to the Western culture. So here the traditional cultures were rooted out, destroyed, and rather they made the people to follow the Western culture. So this is the end of the chapter. We have completed the first chapter. Okay, go through the video. If you have any doubt, you can ask.